So Black Myth Wukong did release earlier this week, and the reviews have been fairly good, I would say. I mean, it's in like the lower 80s, I believe, on Metacritic, but the big story has been the number of people who have been checking this game out, buying it, and even pushing it now to a milestone that we haven't really seen hit unless you look to some of the biggest franchises right now in gaming. And yes, today we're going to be putting Black Myth Wukong in the same sentence as Pokemon when it comes to sales, which is, I mean, just downright impressive. So if you guys enjoy this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. Now, this was shared by Game Science, of course, the developers of Black Myth Wukong, just ahead of the weekend. And we can see it says 10 million units sold across all platforms. Now, in terms of platforms, we have PC and PlayStation 5. And they also mentioned 3 million concurrent players across all platforms. That seemed to confuse some people for some reason. I guess just two different numbers here, 10 million and 3 million. So the 10 million refers to, of course, the cumulative number of games that have sold, just a la carte. The 3 million concurrent player mark is how many people were online connected playing at any given time. And that we were able to see that on Steam, for example, throughout the week. And we saw that it had hit a high mark of like 2.35 million people at one time. And it was pretty clear that a large majority of those players were based out of China, because when it was nighttime in China, you see the mark dip down fairly low, and then it would pop right back up. That really caused some, I mean, just strange articles that are written when it's like, oh yeah, Black Myth Wukong already down 2 million players. And then a few hours later, it starts ticking back up, and oh wait, now it's hit a new high mark for concurrent players, because China has woken up. And there is an entire article that we'll take a look at here that more or less talks about the impact of Black Myth Wukong when it comes to PlayStation even in China. But yes, this is incredibly impressive. 10 million copies selling in its first 3 days, as they mention here, the date as of 21:30 Beijing time, August 23rd. That puts it in the same category as the fastest selling Pokemon game to date, that being Scarlet and Violet, at 10 million copies in roughly 3 days as well. Keep in mind, though, those are two SKUs, so there are many people who buy Pokemon and they just buy both versions at the same time. So the fact that we don't have two different versions of Black Myth Wukong, yet it's still able to hit that velocity of sales, it's extremely impressive. It's now reached this mark faster than Elden Ring, than Hogwarts Legacy, and those were two behemoths when they came out in terms of just sales and interest. And something tells me Black Myth Wukong is only going to continue to sell, maybe not this velocity, but still very, very quickly. I wouldn't be shocked if we got milestone updates of 15 million and 20 million by next month. Like, it is on that sort of pace right now. In fact, it's 2.35-ish million concurrent players on Steam, makes it second all-time ever on the platform, just behind PUBG, although that was over 3 million. I think it's like 3.2. So there's a healthy margin between the two, right? A healthy gap, but PUBG was on another level in general, right, when that came out. But still, Black Myth Wukong, single-player action RPG. It's not typical to see these kinds of numbers, really, for the most part, digital only. I know there's like collector's editions you can buy and stuff, and also it being an M-rated game, there's a lot of stuff technically that works against these sorts of releases to get these kind of numbers. That's why when you see something like this, or you see something like Elden Ring, it is a very special thing to see in games. But of course, with this level of success brings a ton of discourse online, and as someone who is now almost at the end of chapter 4, some of the stuff I've seen thrown around in articles, it's pretty clear that the authors haven't really played enough of the game to write some of these articles, is what I'll say. Because some of them I was just scratching my head when I was reading the headlines, even through different parts of it. But either way, one piece that I would absolutely recommend, and I'll link it down below, is from Daniel Ahmed, who is very familiar, actually an analyst when it comes to games, specifically in these regions like China, for example, as they do a lot of coverage for sales for games, debuts, development, that kind of stuff. And there's an entire blog post that he put up that really went over, well, chronicled the journey of this game leading up to release, and then its subsequent explosion online when it did come out on the 20th. And even going as far as to point out that, yes, this is a big breakout moment even for sort of the Chinese market with just video games in general. Now, the thing that is interesting is Black Myth Wukong is priced, if you go if you do exchange rates, stuff for currency, like $38 US in China. So it is cheaper there. But that also just sort of more or less goes with the flow of what the value of that currency is in that region. But it's pointed out heavily that, yeah, a vast majority of the traffic for downloads was coming from Asia. And I think it's pretty obvious to many people who look at this, and I still see it online sometimes where people are like, no, it can't all be like a ton of this can't just be coming from China. I would say because we kind of get an idea when it comes to concurrent player counts, depending on the times in different regions and stuff, and even in this case, the amount of bandwidth and who's basically downloading the game, seems like at bare minimum, it is just majority China, and then the rest of the pie is just kind of split up between different regions, which I don't really know why that's an issue anyway. It's pretty obvious that this game, it being based on completely Journey to the West, and it being a Chinese developer, that yes, it would appeal to that region pretty much over any others. We've also had some reports out of China that PS5 systems are just selling out, and I actually covered one story about this that was really just like one store or a chain of stores that had a bunch of calls for the PlayStation 5. One, I think it was PlayStation's official store in China, sold 6 PlayStation 5s. So not like an overwhelming amount, but the fact that there is increased interest in the PlayStation 5 brand, or just PlayStation brand in China, it is a big deal for Sony. As I mentioned, they are trying to make more of an impact, just grow in China, and having a game like this that just happens to be attached to the system because the Xbox seemed to be an issue for development, just happens to work out. Like, Sony was just standing there kind of like Baldur's Gate 3 and is like, oh, well, okay, sure, we'll just be an accidental timed exclusive. Why not? And you see the results here with just PlayStation 5 systems selling. Now, we do know, just based on the concurrent player counts that they shared, 3 million, well, 2.35 or so, was on Steam at its height. And we can assume then that for the PlayStation 5, roughly 650 to 700,000 concurrent players there. So yeah, it's selling really well on the PlayStation 5, despite PC obviously being the lead platform. It is also more accessible in places like China, playing on Steam, so it makes a lot of sense. But just impressive stuff here, even for Sony, with the PlayStation 5 benefiting from this massive launch. And I've seen some wild takes online as to people trying to figure out how this game is as successful as it is right now. Like, there has been some interesting reasoning, I'll say, online that's even brought like the China's government into it, and like they're making people buy the game, and it's like, well, maybe people just want to play the game. Maybe the game just looks fun, and they're like, oh, okay, that would be kind of cool. You know, Journey to the West sounds like it'd be an interesting adaptation to a video game format like this. Or maybe they're fans of Dragon Ball, and they're like, oh yeah, that's right, okay, Journey to the West, sure, we'll see how this turns out with a video game. Or maybe just the game is fun and they're getting recommendations. I mean, it, as pointed out by the article here, it had over 4 million wish lists on Steam, which typically shows that, yes, there was a lot of interest in the title. And I remember when it was first unveiled back in 2020, there was a lot of interest. People were like, whoa, this looks cool. And as I've been playing through it, I'm about the 20-hour mark. I said I'm at the end of Chapter 4 right now. It has been a blast to play. It is a game, so the way I can tell a game is really fun is when I'm not playing it, I'll occasionally think about the game, and it's like, oh yeah, maybe this boss would be easier if I had this stance out at the time, or maybe I should spend some stat points on this part of the tree, whether it's just passive abilities for my character or building up certain mysticisms. That's the kind of stuff that I'm thinking about away from the game, and that only happens in titles for me like the God of War. That was one that happened 2018. Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom was another. Halo Infinite actually was one. So when I have that sort of thing happening, I'm like, wow, okay, this might be one of those games that's like that next level for me. And yeah, I'm having a blast with it. Like I said, about 20 hours, and it's been pretty consistent of if I find myself having a little bit of time, I'll turn the PlayStation on and play through it. The PlayStation version does have a lot of performance issues, and this is a game that I kind of wish came out like in November. It sounds funny to say that because you get the game sooner rather than later, but I would not have minded like experiencing this for the first time, say with a PlayStation 5 Pro, provided this game does lean into it. I feel like it will, though. It's Unreal Engine 5, and it seems like they are going for better visuals as well. If you see it on PC, it's definitely a focus on making this game look really, really good, and I think the PS5 Pro is probably something I want to revisit this game with. Still, though, I'm playing through it, and it's not game-breaking or anything with performance on the PS5, but it is noticeable when the frame rate drops. That said, the only other real issue I have currently with the game is there's no map, which is throwing me off because there are a lot of invisible walls you may run into where you think you can go a certain path, but you can't. See, the game is linear technically, but there are so many like split paths that happen, and there are hidden bosses and secret areas to find that if I had a map that maybe is grayed out at first and like the fog fills in as you discover different things, I think it would be better to navigate this game with. And it shocked me that when I turned the game on and I was playing through it and I hit the touchpad on the PlayStation 5, that it did not immediately kick up a map. So any updates in the future, I would absolutely like to see some sort of map or tracking system added. Otherwise, though, the combos that you kind of figure out as you go through all the different powers, the transformations, the abilities, the bosses, it is kind of that boss rush thing, but I also find myself exploring a lot between these different bosses. And as I'm getting through, I am feeling more and more powerful with my character. And, you know, it's not a Souls game. It's not even really a Souls-light game, but I get why people look at it where it has the stamina meter, you do rest and respawn a bunch of enemies, mana meter, all different ways to kind of approach bosses, why people thought of it as a Souls game when they were first playing it, or at least seeing it through gameplay demonstrations and stuff. But it's certainly not as hard as a Souls game, and in fact, if you're someone who's been put off by things like Demon Souls or Elden Ring or Dark Souls, I think you would actually still, you should at least give this game a chance, because you might be shocked as, oh, wow, it still has some of those elements, but it is more approachable. And at times, because of that, it's more fun since you're not beating your head against the wall potentially for hours trying to beat a single boss. Although some of them are still kind of challenging, but there's no real punishment for death. You can just keep trying and, I guess, technically beating your head against the wall. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below, because, I mean, this is a breakout, almost surprise success for the industry, especially coming out of China. And now it does make you think about some of the other studios that are currently developing with things like the China Hero Project with PlayStation. And, you know, I do have to mention Xbox one time here because it's been a rough week for them. But the fact that they missed out on the initial launch for this, seemingly because of technical difficulties that we all assume are around the Xbox Series S, a year after the same thing happened with Baldur's Gate 3's breakout success. Man, Xbox just cannot catch a break. But let me know what you guys think about a lot of this down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.